The observatory stood alone on the mountaintop, a stark silhouette against a sky littered with stars. Its large, dish-shaped antennae pointed skyward, ever listening, capturing the faint, cosmic whispers from the endless void beyond. On most nights, all it heard was the familiar hum of static, the dull murmur of radio waves drifting from distant, dying stars. But tonight was different. Tonight, the quiet air was thick with anticipation, as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting. Dr. Claire Hastings sat hunched over her console, her eyes bloodshot and unblinking, fixed on the monitors that glowed a sickly green in the darkness. She had been working for hours, just as she had every night for the past 6 months, searching for a signal, any signal that might break the monotony of the void. She was good at waiting, at losing herself in the deep, endless static. It made her forget about the silence that had come to define her own life, the vast, empty spaces she felt expanding inside her. But tonight something had broken through that silence. The signal was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the background noise, just a series of soft, rhythmic pulses that seemed to come and go at random. Claire's fingers danced over the controls, isolating the frequency, boosting it until the pulses became more pronounced, more deliberate. It wasn't a natural signal. She could tell that much. Natural signals didn't pulse with this kind of regularity, this kind of intent. Her heart began to race as she recorded the data, listening as the signal grew louder, clearer, until she could make out a faint, distorted voice, speaking in fractured bursts. She leaned in closer, her breath shallow, her skin prickling with a cold sweat. "No, this can't be right," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to see someone standing there, watching her. But there was no one. There was only the dark, empty room, and the dim, flickering light of the monitors casting long, skeletal shadows across the walls. The voice crackled through the static, garbled like a transmission struggling to break through an ocean of interference. She adjusted the settings, her hands shaking, and then she heard it again. Clearer this time, just a few words, distorted but unmistakable. "Help. Trapped. Dark." Claire's heart stopped. The voice was human. It sounded like a man, his words slurred and stretched, as if he were struggling to speak. She played the transmission back, adjusting the frequency, isolating each syllable. The more she listened, the more she felt a cold, creeping dread settle over her. How could there be a human voice coming from Proxima Centauri? It was impossible. The closest exoplanet to Earth, over 4 light-years away, and there had never been any record of a manned mission to that star system. Yet, here it was, a voice, calling out across the vastness of space, sounding more desperate with each repetition. The rest of the team was gathered in the control room by the time the signal came through again. They crowded around Claire's console, their faces lit by the pale glow of the screens, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Run it again," said Matt, one of the senior technicians. His voice was calm, but there was a tension in his eyes, a hint of something Claire had never seen before. Fear. She replayed the transmission, and this time the voice was clearer, the words more distinct. "Help us. Trapped. It's dark. Can't escape." There was a long pause, a hiss of static, and then the voice came through again, quieter, softer, as if whispering. "Please, help." Claire's hands were trembling as she turned to the others. "This has to be some kind of interference," she said, her voice strained. Maybe we're picking up a rogue signal bouncing off a satellite, or... But she knew it wasn't interference. She knew that the voice was real, that it was coming from somewhere out there, somewhere far beyond the reach of any human technology. And she wasn't the only one who could feel it. The room was silent, the air thick with unease, as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting. They ran every diagnostic they could think of, checked and rechecked the equipment. But there was nothing. No glitches, no interference. The signal was clean, clear, and consistent, and every time they boosted it, it only grew louder, more urgent. And then, as they were listening, the voice changed. It was still distorted, still broken by bursts of static, but this time it was speaking more clearly, and the words it spoke sent a chill down Claire's spine. Claire. She froze, her mind reeling. The voice had said her name. She looked at the others, but they were just as confused, just as frightened. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "It said my name." They all nodded, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. How? How could it know my name? Matt shook his head, his lips pressed into a thin, grim line. "I don't know," he said, "but we need to figure out what the hell is going on here." They spent the next few hours trying to trace the origin of the signal, but it was impossible. The data was scrambled, the coordinates kept shifting, as if the source was moving, drifting through space. Every time they thought they had a lock, it would slip away, disappearing into the static, only to return a few moments later, stronger, clearer, more insistent. And every time it came back, the voice would whisper her name again, like a haunting, echoing through the darkness. Claire. Come. Find us. By the time dawn broke, Claire felt like she was losing her mind. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't moved from her console, her eyes glued to the screen, waiting for the voice to come back. She knew it was dangerous. She knew that she should stop, but she couldn't. It was like the signal had wrapped itself around her, pulling her in, deeper and deeper, until she couldn't see anything else, couldn't hear anything else, couldn't think of anything else. And when the voice came back, louder than ever, she felt a cold, paralyzing fear grip her heart. Claire, help us. They're here. We can't escape. The last words were almost a scream, a cry of pure, unfiltered terror. And then the signal cut out, leaving nothing but a low, humming silence in its wake. Claire sat there, staring at the screen, her mind blank, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to make sense of what she had heard. But one thing was clear. Someone or something was out there, calling for her, reaching out to her from the darkness. And she knew with a sinking, terrifying certainty that whatever it wasn't human. The room was dark, lit only by the dim glow of the monitors and the occasional flicker of a dying fluorescent light. Dr. Claire Hastings sat at her console, her fingers drumming nervously against the desk, her eyes fixed on the endless stream of data scrolling across the screen. She had been at this for days, sifting through archives, poring over encrypted files, trying to make sense of the impossible signal that had invaded her life. But every answer she found only led to more questions, more shadows, and the creeping, suffocating feeling that something was terribly wrong. The voice had not spoken since that night, but its words echoed in her mind, twisting and warping her thoughts. Help us. Trapped. They're here. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear it, whispering her name, begging her to listen. She hadn't been able to sleep, couldn't shake the feeling that there was something out there, lurking just beyond her understanding, waiting for her to find it. She had to know. She had to know what had happened to the voice, to the man, to David. It had taken weeks of digging, but Claire had finally found a lead. Buried deep within the observatory's restricted database, hidden behind layers of outdated security protocols, was a series of classified documents. They were old, decades old, stamped with the insignia of an agency she didn't recognize, and marked with a name that made her blood run cold: Project Pioneer. She had heard rumors about Project Pioneer before, whispers among the scientific community of a top-secret mission that had been conducted in the early days of humanity's interstellar exploration. It was said to be the first and only manned expedition beyond the solar system, a desperate attempt to reach the nearest star, Proxima Centauri, using experimental faster-than-light travel. The mission was supposed to be a beacon of hope, a sign that humanity could reach beyond its cradle and touch the stars. But it had failed. The ship, the Perseus, had disappeared without a trace, and the project had been quietly shut down, its files sealed, its story erased from history. As Claire read through the documents, she felt a chill settle over her. The mission logs were sparse, fragmented, filled with redacted passages and vague, cryptic notes. But there was enough to piece together a grim picture. The Perseus had been launched with a crew of 5, hand-picked from the best and brightest humanity had to offer. They had been sent on a one-way journey to Proxima Centauri B, with the hope that they could establish a foothold on the distant world, build a new home for humanity among the stars. But somewhere along the way, something had gone wrong. The early logs were filled with the usual technical jargon, routine status updates, messages home from the crew, excited and hopeful. But then, something changed. The messages became shorter, more sporadic, laced with an undercurrent of tension and fear. Unidentified anomalies detected, read one entry. Course adjustments required. Navigation systems experiencing erratic behavior. Another entry a week later was even more troubling. Crew reporting unusual phenomena. Voices heard in the communications array. Possible interference. Source unknown. And then, silence. The logs ended abruptly with no explanation, no final message, just an empty void where the words should have been. Claire's hands were shaking as she scrolled through the final entries, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see it, could imagine the crew of the Perseus drifting alone in the cold, dark expanse of space, surrounded by nothing but silence, listening to the same voice she had heard, calling out to them, whispering to them, drawing them in. She wondered if they had felt the same dread she did, the same gnawing, suffocating fear that something was watching them, waiting for them. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden alert. A new message had come through, this one from an encrypted email address. She hesitated, her cursor hovering over the screen before opening it. The message was brief, its tone urgent, almost desperate. Dr. Hastings, I understand you have been investigating the Proxima signal. We need to meet. There are things you don't know, things they won't tell you. Come alone. Midnight. The old observatory cafe. I can't explain here, they're listening. The message was unsigned, but it didn't need to be. Claire recognized the name from the files she had been reading. Dr. Marcus Caldwell, one of the original engineers behind Project Pioneer. He was supposed to be retired, living somewhere off the grid, far from the reach of any government or agency. She had no idea how he knew she was looking into this, but she knew she had no choice. She had to go. The cafe was dark and deserted when she arrived, its windows fogged with the cold, misty night air. Claire stepped inside, her breath shallow, her heart pounding in her chest. She scanned the room, her eyes adjusting to the dim light, and saw a man sitting alone at a corner table, his face hidden beneath the brim of a worn black hat. He looked up as she approached, his eyes dark and weary, and she could see the weight of years etched into his face, the haunted look of a man who had seen too much and had been running from it ever since. "Dr. Hastings," he said, his voice low, gravelly. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't show." He gestured for her to sit, and she did, her hands clenched tightly around her bag, her eyes fixed on him. "I don't have much time," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "They don't like it when people start asking questions about Project Pioneer. They spent a lot of time making sure no one would." "What happened to the Perseus?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Where did they go?" Dr. Caldwell sighed, his eyes distant, as if he were looking back through the years, remembering something he had tried very hard to forget. "The Perseus didn't just disappear," he said. "It was pulled off course. The moment they activated the FTL drive, something went wrong. They weren't just traveling faster than light. They were moving through something that wasn't supposed to be there. We thought we understood how the drive worked, but we didn't. We were just playing with forces we didn't understand." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? What did they find?" Dr. Caldwell hesitated, his hands trembling. "They found something out there, in the dark, something that shouldn't exist. It latched onto the ship, onto the crew, twisted their minds, turned them against each other. The last transmission we received was garbled, fragmented, but we could still hear them, screaming. Whatever it wasn't just out there, in space. It was in their heads, whispering to them, showing them things no human should ever see." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. "That signal you heard, Dr. Hastings, it's not just a distress call. It's a lure. It's trying to draw you in, to make you listen, to make you understand. It wants you to open the door." Claire's mouth went dry, her mind reeling. "A lure? For what?" Dr. Caldwell's face darkened, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not human and it's not from Proxima Centauri. It's been waiting, drifting through the void, looking for a way in, and now it's found one." Before Claire could ask another question, the lights in the cafe flickered, and Dr. Caldwell stood up abruptly. "You need to stop, Doctor." "Hastings," he said, his voice urgent, "stop listening to the signal. Destroy your equipment, burn your files, and forget you ever heard it. If you keep going, you'll end up just like them, lost, trapped in the dark, forever." He started to walk away, but Claire grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean, just like them? What happened to the crew of the Perseus?" Dr. Caldwell hesitated, and for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear, and whispered two words that sent a chill through her soul. "They're still there." And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the night, leaving Claire alone with the echoes of his warning and the creeping, suffocating realization that she had been pulled into something far darker, far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The nights had grown longer. Claire had always been accustomed to late hours, but now time seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the universe itself were slowing down, drawing her deeper into its dark, inescapable grip. The voices from the signal haunted her dreams, seeping into every waking moment, and the shadow of Dr. Caldwell's warning loomed over her like a storm cloud. She had tried to forget, to pull herself back from the brink, but it was too late. The signal had taken root inside her, burrowing into her mind, whispering to her even when she wasn't listening. She found herself back at the observatory, night after night, replaying the recordings, analyzing every tiny fluctuation, every subtle change in pitch. The voice was clearer now, more coherent, as if whatever was on the other end was getting better at speaking. But that only made it worse, made it feel less like a plea and more like a trap, a snare tightening around her. "Claire," the voice would say, the syllables stretching, distorting, as if spoken through a mouth not quite accustomed to forming words. "Come, find us. It's so dark. Please, we need you." The words sent a chill down her spine. She knew it was madness, but she couldn't stop herself. She had to know what had happened to the Perseus, what had happened to David and the rest of the crew. And more than that, she had to know why it was calling her. The signal had never spread beyond the observatory, never leaked into the wider world. It was as if it were meant just for her, and the thought of that, of being singled out by something so vast and unknowable, filled her with a sickening dread. Her obsession had not gone unnoticed. The rest of the team had grown wary, their eyes following her every move, whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. She had tried to share what she knew, tried to convince them of the importance of the signal, but they hadn't listened. They had seen the fear in her eyes, the way her hands trembled when she spoke about it, and they had pulled back, treating her like she was the one who had lost her mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had. But it didn't matter anymore. She was past the point of no return, and she knew that the answers she sought wouldn't be found on Earth. The signal had changed, shifted subtly, and now it carried with it a set of coordinates that lay far beyond Proxima Centauri, deep into uncharted space. It was as if the voice were guiding her, showing her the way, and she couldn't ignore it. She had to follow it, had to find out what was waiting at the end of that dark, endless road. Claire stood in the hangar bay of the research vessel, Erebus, her breath misting in the cold air, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The Erebus was an old ship, a relic from the early days of space exploration, but it had been refitted with the latest technology, and it was the only vessel capable of making the journey she was about to undertake. The team had refused to join her, had begged her to reconsider, but she had been adamant. She was going alone. Whatever was out there, whatever was waiting for her, she had to face it on her own. She had told herself it was about finding answers, about uncovering the truth behind the Perseus and the signal. But deep down, she knew there was more to it than that. She had felt a pull, a compulsion that she couldn't explain, and it scared her. It felt like she was being drawn into a vast, invisible web, and every step she took only brought her closer to the center. As the engines roared to life and the ship lifted off, Claire felt a moment of pure, unfiltered terror. She was leaving everything behind: Earth, the observatory, the safety of the known, and venturing into the abyss, to a place where no human had ever been. But there was no turning back now. She was committed, bound by a force she couldn't understand, a force that had reached out across the void to find her. The journey took weeks, The Erebus cut through space, its engines humming softly, the stars outside the viewport stretching into long, thin lines of light as the ship slipped into faster-than-light travel. Claire spent most of her time in the control room, staring out into the darkness, her mind drifting, lost in thoughts of what she might find. The voice had grown silent, but she could still feel it, lingering just beyond the edge of perception, a constant, quiet presence that filled her with a cold, creeping dread. She thought of Dr. Caldwell, of his haunted eyes, his warning to abandon the signal, to walk away before it was too late. She had ignored him, but now, alone in the dark, she wondered if she had made a mistake. What if this was all a trap? What if whatever was out there wasn't calling for help, but luring her in like a spider waiting for a fly to stumble into its web? As the ship neared the coordinates, the Erebus's systems began to malfunction. The lights flickered, the engines stuttered, and the sensors picked up strange, erratic readings, as if the space around them was warping, bending in ways that defied all logic. Claire tried to run diagnostics, but the data was scrambled, the screens flashing with incomprehensible symbols and patterns that made her head throb just to look at them. She felt like she was being watched, like there were eyes in the dark, hidden just beyond the reach of the ship's lights, staring at her, waiting. Then the voice returned, "Claire, you're close. So close." It was louder now, clearer, and there was a strange, almost mocking tone to it, as if it were playing with her, toying with her fear. She wanted to respond, to ask who it was, what it wanted, but her throat was dry, her tongue heavy and numb. She could only listen, helpless, as the voice guided her deeper into the darkness, pulling her toward the source of the signal. The Erebus dropped out of faster-than-light travel and the stars snapped back into focus. Claire stared out the viewport, her breath catching in her throat. Ahead of the ship, floating silently in the void, was a massive structure, unlike anything she had ever seen. It was dark and twisted, a labyrinth of spires and tendrils that seemed to writhe and shift in the faint starlight, as if it were alive. It looked ancient, impossibly old, and yet there was something about it that felt wrong, like it didn't belong, like it was a wound cut into the fabric of reality itself. As the Erebus approached, Claire felt a pressure build in her head, a low, throbbing pain that grew stronger the closer she got. The voice was louder now, almost deafening, a chorus of whispers and screams that echoed inside her skull. "Come, find us. Help us escape. Open the door." The words overlapped, blending into a cacophony of desperate, pleading voices, and she realized with a sickening lurch that they were all human. The crew of the Perseus. Claire activated the ship's scanners, but the readings made no sense. The structure was emitting strange, pulsing waves of energy, unlike anything she had ever seen, and there were no signs of life, except for one. A single, faint signal, buried deep within the structure, pulsing in time with the voices. It was as if they were all converging on that one point, drawn to it, held there by some invisible force. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. Taking a deep breath, she guided the Erebus closer, bringing the ship to rest beside the massive, gaping maw of an entrance. The structure loomed over her, its surface shifting and writhing as if it were breathing, alive. For a moment she hesitated, her hand hovering over the controls. But then the voice whispered again, soft, seductive, reassuring. "It's okay, Claire. It's almost over. Come inside." The words echoed through her mind, drowning out her fear, and she found herself pressing the button, opening the airlock, stepping into the abyss. The corridor was dark, the walls smooth and cold, covered in strange organic patterns that pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. She felt like she was walking through the veins of some giant, slumbering creature, and with every step she took, the whispers grew louder, clearer, more frantic. She followed the signal, deeper and deeper into the structure, the path winding and twisting, leading her further away from the ship, from safety, from everything she knew. The air was thick, heavy, and she struggled to breathe, her vision blurring, her mind slipping. But she kept moving, driven by a force she couldn't resist, until she reached the end of the corridor, and there, waiting for her, was a door. It was massive, ancient, covered in strange, intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change when she looked at them. The whispers were louder now, almost a scream, and she could hear them, begging, pleading, "Help us! Let us out! It's so dark, we're trapped." But there was another voice, deeper, colder, hidden beneath the others, and it was laughing. "Open it, Claire. Open the door. Let me in." Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding, but she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface. The moment she touched it, the voices stopped, and for a brief, terrifying moment, there was silence. Then, with a low, rumbling groan, the door began to open, and beyond it, she could see only darkness, deep, endless, and hungry. And in that darkness, something moved. The door slid open with a deep, resonant groan, a sound that echoed down the dark corridors like a death knell. Claire felt a rush of cold air wash over her, carrying with it the stench of something old, something rotten, something that had been sealed away for a very long time. She hesitated, standing on the threshold, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Beyond the door was nothing but darkness, thick, impenetrable, and alive, like a black ocean that swallowed the light and devoured everything it touched. She could feel it watching her, could sense the eyes hidden within the dark, staring at her from every direction, cold and unblinking. For a moment she thought about turning back, running, sealing the door behind her, and never looking back. But she couldn't. The voice wouldn't let her. It was there, whispering to her, gentle, reassuring, like the soft, sweet murmur of a lover. "It's okay, Claire. You're almost there. Just a little further." The words tugged at her, pulling her forward, drawing her deeper into the abyss. She took a step, then another, and before she realized what she was doing, she had crossed the threshold, stepping into the darkness. The door slid shut behind her, sealing her in, cutting off any hope of escape. For a moment there was nothing. No sound, no light, no sense of direction. Just an endless suffocating void, pressing down on her, squeezing the air from her lungs. She tried to move, but her legs felt heavy, as if she were wading through thick, oily water. Panic flared in her chest, and she struggled to breathe, to see, to understand where she was, but there was nothing. She was alone, adrift, lost in a sea of black. And then, slowly, the darkness began to shift. Shapes emerged, twisting and writhing, forming and reforming, like shadows cast by a flickering, unseen flame. Claire could see faces, hundreds of them, floating in the dark, their eyes wide and empty, their mouths open in silent screams. She recognized some of them, the crew of the Perseus, their faces twisted with fear and agony, their eyes pleading, begging for help. But there were others too, faces she didn't know, faces that seemed to shift and change when she looked at them, becoming something else, something alien, something wrong. The voices returned, louder now, overlapping, blending together into a cacophony of whispers and screams. "Help us! We're trapped! It's so dark! Please, let us out!" The words echoed around her, filling the space, filling her mind, drowning out her thoughts. She covered her ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside her, crawling through her skull, burrowing into her brain. "Make it stop," she whispered, her voice trembling, barely more than a breath. "Please, make it stop." The darkness shifted, and suddenly she was no longer alone. Something was standing in front of her, just a few feet away, a shape barely visible in the gloom. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its body was wrong, its limbs too long, its form distorted, as if seen through a warped lens. But its eyes were clear, bright and burning, like cold blue stars, and they were fixed on her, unblinking, watching. "Hello, Claire," it said, and its voice was not like the others. It was deep, smooth, resonant, and it cut through the cacophony, silencing the other voices. It was calm, almost gentle, and yet there was something in it, something that made her skin crawl, that filled her with a cold, creeping dread. "I've been waiting for you." Claire couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She could only stare, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. As the thing stepped closer, its form becoming clearer, more defined. It looked almost human, but not quite. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over a skeletal frame, and its face was smooth, featureless except for those eyes, those bright, burning eyes that never wavered. What are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "What do you want?" The thing tilted its head as if considering the question, and then it smiled. The smile was wrong, too wide, too sharp, like a crack splitting open a porcelain mask. "I am a traveler, just like you," it said. "I come from a place far beyond your understanding, a place where time does not exist, where light and dark are one and the same. I have been here for a very long time, waiting, searching, and now I have found you." Claire took a step back, her hands shaking, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. "I don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "What do you mean you found me?" The thing's smile widened, and its eyes glowed brighter, cutting through the darkness. "You heard my call, Claire. You listened when no one else would. You came even though you were afraid. That is why I chose you. That is why you are here." The words sank into her, heavy and cold, and she felt a chill run down her spine. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. I didn't come here for you. I came to find the crew of the Perseus. I came to help them." The thing laughed, a low, rumbling sound that echoed through the darkness. "Oh, but you have helped them," it said. "You see, they are not lost. They are here, with me. They have been here ever since they stepped into the dark, ever since they opened the door, just as you have. They are a part of me now, just as you will be." Claire's mind reeled, her thoughts spiraling into chaos. "No, that's not possible. They can't be." But she knew, deep down, that it was true. She could feel it, could feel them, all around her, inside her, their thoughts, their memories, their fear. The darkness wasn't just a void. It was alive, and it was hungry. and it had been feeding on them, drawing them in, consuming them piece by piece. She felt a surge of panic, a desperate need to escape, to get away from the thing, from the dark. But she couldn't move. The darkness had her, and it wasn't going to let her go. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" The thing stepped closer, its eyes burning, and for a moment she thought she could see something behind them, something vast and terrible, something that stretched out into the infinite dark, twisting and writhing. "Because I am alone," it said, and for the first time there was something in its voice, something like sadness, like longing. "I have been alone for so long, drifting through the void, searching for something, someone, to share the dark with. And now I have found you, Claire. You will stay with me, and I will never be alone again." "No," Claire said, her voice trembling, her vision blurring with tears. "No, please. I don't want this." But the thing only smiled, its eyes glowing brighter, and she could feel the darkness closing in around her, tightening, suffocating, pulling her down. "It's okay, Claire," it whispered. "It will be over soon. Just close your eyes and let go. There is no need to be afraid. The dark is not so terrible once you accept it." She tried to fight, tried to scream, but the darkness was everywhere, inside her, around her, filling her lungs, choking her, and she could feel herself slipping away, her thoughts unraveling, her memories fading. She saw flashes of light, brief, flickering images, her childhood, her friends, the observatory, the stars. But they were slipping through her fingers, dissolving into the dark. And then, in the final moments, she understood. The signal had never been a cry for help. It had been a lure, a beacon, calling out to the lonely, the lost, the desperate. It had found her, just as it had found the crew of the Perseus, just as it would find others. It was not a voice seeking to be saved. It was a voice seeking to consume, to pull others into the dark, to make them a part of it, forever. As the last light faded, Claire heard the thing's voice one last time, soft and gentle, echoing through the void. "Welcome home, Claire. I have been waiting for you." The observatory was silent, its equipment humming softly in the dim light, the screens flickering with lines of static. It had been weeks since Dr. Claire Hastings had left, weeks since anyone had heard from her, and the staff had grown uneasy, whispers of her disappearance spreading like wildfire. But no one spoke of the signal, of the strange, distorted voice that had haunted the observatory for so long. They had cut the transmission, erased the recordings, done everything they could to forget. But in the dead of night, when the wind howled through the empty halls, when the darkness seemed to press in from all sides, the equipment would flicker to life, and the signal would return, louder, clearer, stronger than before. "Hello, can you hear me?" And somewhere, far beyond the stars, something waited.